Hello everybody. Now we're going to be talking about focal length and lenses. Most good pictures are good for one of two reasons. There's something that no one's ever seen before, and that's truly a tall order these days. Bigfoot, Moby Dick, the abominable snowman, giant squid. Those are really tough things to get pictures of though. The second way to make great pictures is to show something in a way that nobody's seen it before. That's where we come in. That's what we're most likely to photograph, really. Everyday scenes that are shot so well and unusually, they become interesting. Your camera lenses are tools you need to get this job done. That's what we're going to talk about, lenses. They are the basic tools of photography. In this lecture, I'm going to go through several lenses and talk about what they can do. Let me show you what I mean with a short film I made with the Great Courses team. Let's go into the field now and see these different lenses in action. Okay, so now we're out at Raptor Recovery, Nebraska, near Elmwood, Nebraska. So we've got Doug Finch back here, and he's got a great horned owl on his fist, and we're going to use this opportunity to photograph something very interesting. The great horned owl, no offense, Doug, of course, with a long lens. We're going to talk about lenses today and how different lenses give us different effects. We're going to go with a telephoto first and work our way up to wide angle right against this owl. This is a very tolerant owl. So we're going to start with the long lens. What's a telephoto do? A telephoto basically reduces the world to a pinpoint. And it's what most wildlife photographers will use, or sports photographers will use, because we can't often just walk right up to our subject, especially wildlife. You can't just walk up to an owl in the wild. So the telephoto brings that wildlife up, fills the frame, and makes things interesting. Now the disadvantage to a telephoto is that you don't see much of the world. You just see your subject. The advantage to it is that it fills the frame, as I said, but it also makes the background a nice blur of soft color. So in this case, we have prairie grasses in the background. We're going to try that with our telephoto first and just show you how backgrounds are really, really cleaned up well with a telephoto lens. So I have a 200 to 400 millimeter lens here, and we'll get started. Okay, very nice, beautiful. So this owl is outstanding because he's standing right there, not going anywhere. We're able to use our telephoto. This is a 200, 400, could be a much longer lens if we wanted, but there's no need for that really. So I've done a couple shots showing full body, and I'll move in a little bit tighter now. We'll see the talons tight, and we'll see the face tight. Very nice. Beautiful. Just beautiful. So we get in tight, we can show just the eyes. They glow this beautiful golden color. We can show the talons all covered with feathers. And I could work this all day, actually. The light's soft and beautiful. Beautiful, soft light. It's a great day for this. We could work this all day, but we're not going to. I want to move next into a normal lens, more as our eye sees it. There's basically three components to this. Telephoto, really bringing in the subject, blurring the background. A normal lens, kind of like how we see the world. And then we'll end with a wide angle lens. Okay, so now we're still with the telephoto, but I moved up closer, didn't I? Look at this, I'm almost on top of this owl. Most people think with a telephoto you have to stay back. I use a telephoto actually as almost a long lens macro, if you will. So I'll do people portraits like this. And especially with this owl, he's not going anywhere, the light continues to be very soft. So I'm gonna spin around and just do tight shots of the eyes and the talons, whatever he'll give me. He's a very tolerant bird. Look at that, perfect, beautiful. That's very nice. Nothing but the eyes, those glowing eyes. Of course, while we're standing here, we may as well do a picture of Doug's eyes, liven things up. Got to keep the talent happy. All right, so we've done a few shots that are very tight with this. It's a great lens for actually getting very, very close. Again, you don't have to stand way back. Get in close with a telephoto, really do some amazing things. Have a tripod for this lens because it's big and it tends to shake, it gets very heavy. So we're going to set this aside, right there. Make sure it doesn't go anywhere. Don't want it to fall to the ground or you will see a grown man cry. And now we're going to use a normal lens. This is a normal lens, okay? Look at this. A normal lens is just basically how the eye sees. That's tough to do. It's really tough to get a good picture with a normal lens because everybody sees kind of the same way. You have to have something extraordinary. Well, to me, having a great horned owl right in front of you is extraordinary. The light's very soft. So let's see what we can do just with this. It's not going anywhere. This is actually a 24 to 70 zoom, so it's got a little bit more range. The owl's flying. That's kind of extraordinary. I should have gotten a picture. There we go. Beautiful, beautiful. Look at that. Very nice. Very nice. It's called baiting. These birds do that a lot. It's not harmful to them. You're getting the energy worked off. He'll go right back on that perch. Okay, so we'll try a few shots. Again, the owl's in the same spot. The light's nice. This is actually a good place to work our angles a little bit. High angle, low angle. We got a really pretty barn in the background. Grasses, the cornfield's going away in the distance. So we'll just try a few with the normal lens. Perfect, very nice. I mean, it's really hard to go wrong, actually. It's a visually loaded situation. I like those. So while we're here, may as well talk about using a little point and shoot camera. This is a little Canon, but there's a million of them. You've got a great subject. It's not going anywhere. The light's fabulous, and we're close. We're close. So why not use something that's simple, easy to use, a camera that you will actually carry? Who wants to carry this much weight if they're not working? So just something that fits in your pocket. This, we can get down low. I mean, how nice is that? Beautiful. Just move over the side. Frame them up in the barn. Show the landscape. Really nice. I mean, you can do great pictures with a point and shoot. It's all about being in a visually loaded situation. That's all it is. So, all right, we can use virtually any camera on this. It's not the box, it's just being close to something and seeing it well. And in nice light, of course. Okay, so we've got normal lenses covered. Let's try wide angle next. You're not going to believe this, but this owl has turned white and gotten smaller. I mean, I don't understand how it works. I'm not from the country really, but actually, of course, this is a European barn owl, and our other owl, the great horned owl, got a little tired of me. So we're switching owls here. To finish out, we're going to talk about using a wide lens. So this is Janet. She's got Nimbus on her fist. Nimbus is kind of an educational bird, goes to a lot of schools, tolerates a lot of things. So we'll see if Nimbus will tolerate a few pictures right now from really up close. Look at that. No problem. A little bit of low angle, a bit of high angle. Right up. What a nice bird, huh? That is a tolerant bird. Does it get any better than that? I don't think so. So let's go back and we'll look at the difference between these three types of lenses: telephoto, normal or medium lens, and wide angle. Let's really look at the difference between what each of these types of lenses can do. Aren't those birds amazing? Really awesome, aren't they? Raptor Recovery Nebraska works hard to educate the public about these fabulous, beautiful birds of prey. But back to camera lenses. So you saw me shoot with a telephoto, a normal, and a wide angle. Take another look at how the images from these lenses compare. Let's look at these real quick. Long lens, we understand this, don't we? Long lens blurs out the background, pretty beautiful. A normal lens, look at this. A little bit of a scene there, but still the owl stands out well. And a wide angle, the subject becomes very, very important. The subject's big and the rest of the world fades away with a wide angle. Let's talk about the mechanics of how this all works right now, okay? Lenses are distinguished by focal length. The bigger the number, the longer the lens. When your subject is far away and I want to bring them in closer, I'll want to use a longer lens with a longer focal length, if I can't walk up close to it, that is. With a long focal length lens, you're really reaching out and grabbing a single point in the landscape. With a shorter focal length, you're showing much more of the world in a wider view. Camera lenses come in fixed and zoom focal lengths. The more expensive lenses, most of the time they're zoom lenses, and they're labeled by the range of focal lengths that they can effectively photograph. Fixed length lenses don't zoom. They're built to capture one width, and that's it. I have 4 main lenses that I carry. There are others that we'll discuss at the end of the lecture, but they're for more specialized picture taking. I want to start with the basics. One lens I carry a lot is this one. This is a 70 to 200 millimeter lens, okay? I carry this in the side pocket of my vest or in my camera bag because it's big. I don't use it a ton. But with this, you can reach out pretty well and touch something that's a little farther away. Let's look here. Like turtle races. Okay, that's kind of cute. Didn't want to get in the middle of the circle. Use a long lens to reach out. What else can we get? We can kind of fill the frame with the subject a little bit, can't we? Have a nice soft background of color, just kind of a nice palette of color back there. Or we can zoom in a little bit more, really get a facial reaction. Or you can even zoom into details with this lens. So it's very handy and very versatile. It's a nice lens to have. Weighs a little bit more, but sometimes it's an indispensable lens to have. You can't live without it. Look at this. This was for a story on wolves, gray wolves for National Geographic. These are wild wolves that have just woken up from sleeping all day on top of a frozen lake in northern Minnesota by the Canadian border. There's no way I could stick a long lens out the window and shoot this. There's no way. I have a moving airplane? I don't think so. A huge lens? Forget it. Too much vibration. It would fall out. It'd be terrible. With this little lens, it works great. You stick it out the window. It's 20 below zero, by the way. Stick it out. Get your pictures. You can shoot a nice wide view with this because you're up so high. Then we can get in a little closer. Look at that. Now we can actually see the wolves. And a little closer yet. Do a nice graphic shot. So that is a really, really handy lens to have. I mean, tremendously handy. At the other end of the spectrum is what I'd call a really wide lens, a 14-24. It's really wide, but you know what? It's rectilinear, and that's very important. Let's take a look. This lens, 14-24. I work with this a lot. Look at that front element. That just looks expensive, doesn't it? And it kind of is. It kind of is. This one's called rectilinear, which means it does not bend or distort the edges. And this is great for landscapes. It's very nice for landscapes. Check it out. Wow, big scene of bison, right? It's also good for scenes where you can't really back up, but you want to show a whole room. Very, very handy. Very handy lens. That lens won't really distort like a fisheye, which is nice. That's what gives the picture a circular look. It's a fisheye lens. In my opinion, I don't even own a fisheye. I don't ever think I've shot with one. It's useful, but it's kind of a gimmick lens in a way. It's sometimes appropriate, but not very often. With a fisheye, you're usually thinking of that curvy, stretchy effect rather than the picture. Wide lenses are really good for certain things, but not for everything. They're good for use in interiors when you can't back up anymore, or exteriors of wide or big things. And they're great at giving us a lot of context in our pictures because they show so much background, but they still should be used with care. And I'll explain more about that in just a minute. It's hard to show an entire mountain range with a telephoto lens, right? Unless you're way far away from it. But you can show it with a wide lens if you're standing in the right spot. If you're standing miles and miles away from the mountain range, sure, you can try using a long lens, nothing wrong with that. But if you're standing at the base of the mountains or even in the mountains themselves, I'd probably try a wide lens. Wide angle lenses generally have a focal length of about 28 millimeter, depending on who you're talking to. You can use these lenses to accentuate the distance between objects. They're also useful in very tight quarters, okay? This frame, shot with an 18 millimeter lens. This is really wide, but absolutely necessary in this case. This is my daughter's room after she cleaned it. There's a dog asleep somewhere in that room, sad to say. Here's something else important to keep in mind with wide-angle lenses. I try to keep from putting people on one side or the other of a wide-angle picture along the edges. Why? Because it stretches them. Again, by wide, I'm talking 24, 20, 18, 16 millimeters. With a really wide lens, let's say 24 millimeter or wider, I'll try to center my subject a lot so the lens doesn't distort them. If I can't do that really, I'll back up. You ever see a picture like this where somebody's teeth are bigger than their forehead? They look like a horse. That's because a really wide angle lens was used. This is a 14-24, which is a nice lens, but you don't really want to position your subject so they're so close up to the frame when it's set to 14 millimeter. It's stretch city, baby, and that ain't really good. You can get by with a wide angle lens and no normal lens. You could, and I did for years, but that's not really optimal. And this is important. I don't really think you should use a wide angle lens as a substitute for good seeing. Let me tell you a little story. When I first started out at the Daily Nebraskan, my college newspaper, I got this 24 millimeter lens and I was so proud of it. And I remember photographing everyone I could with this brand spanking new lens. It was kind of silly in a way. You know, I was like, wow, look at this. I can shove it right into people's faces and get really close to them and get their eyes sharp. I mean, I did Red Skelton, the famous comedian. I did a photo illustration for the Great American Smokeout Day. I did this friend of mine that was collecting bats. I did a guy that's got a crawdad pinching his finger. I did all these pictures, and they're all kind of gimmicky and they're all stretchy. With my new 24 millimeter, I photographed anybody I could sneak up on, and well, it just kind of made everybody look a little bit freakish. It was a certain look, but it was because I really didn't know any better. I wasn't thinking about good seeing, I was just thinking about getting close to people and getting their eyes in focus, both new concepts to me at the time. But I thought, if you're close enough and the eye is sharp, well, that's good enough. I'm telling you, it's a tool. I'm not saying you shouldn't use wide angles once in a while, and you should, but not for every single portrait for 6 months like I did because I couldn't afford another lens. I mean, holy cow. You know, the worst of it, I photographed Johnny Cash. I snuck into his dressing room. He's a really nice guy, super nice guy, and he put up with me sticking this lens right in his face. And I tell you, I wish I could have that one to do over again because I would have shot it with a little bit longer lens. 35 to 50 millimeter lenses are called normal lenses. They produce images that look natural to human observers because we see at about that focal length. They're often used for portraits because they don't cause the distortions that really wide lenses do. What I like about normal lenses is they allow us to shoot in a straightforward way without gimmicks. It's all how you think at that point. It's hard to show off how well you can see with a wide angle lens. You're not really sure how much of the shot is lens and how much is the photographer. Let's look at a couple of normal lens shots here. This is a very straightforward picture of the White House at a nice time of the day, and it seems to work, right? Seems to work. Or this kid holding up a fish in Uganda. It's just basically how our eye sees. So it requires us to look for good moments, funny moments like this, like my kid Spencer throwing a fit at the breakfast table, right? A normal lens is how we see, and I really prefer that. I use a normal lens most of the time anymore when on assignment for National Geographic. Can you imagine that? I'm traveling around the world, I'm shooting with like a 50 millimeter lens. Good grief. If you can pull off a good picture with a normal lens, it means you've really done something. You're really seeing something well. If you can take a really interesting picture with a normal lens, it means you've either witnessed something amazing or you're taking something ordinary and making it amazing. It means you're not relying on those super wide or telephoto lenses as a crutch to get you there to an interesting picture. Most of us walk around and we see the world with a built-in 50 millimeter lens in our brain, basically. How in the world do you see differently when you have the same focal length eyes as everyone else on the planet? That's the secret to great photography. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? How do you take a 50 millimeter lens and make something extraordinary, surprising, something that's never been done before? That's tough, but not nearly as tough as if you hadn't taken this course. We will get there together, I promise. Okay, my secret lens, my workhorse lens, is this one. And I mean, it's just a lens. It's a 24-70 millimeter, 24 to 70. It just basically sees as our eyes do. Our eyes see about 35 to 50 millimeter, in that range. So this lens, a 24 to 70, sees much as the same as our human eye does, plus some. I use this lens 99% of the time, I bet, right? If I could only grab one lens out of the house because the house was on fire. Oh look, a house on fire. How convenient is that? If I could only grab one lens because the house is on fire, I would grab the 24-70. And indeed, that's what I shot these burning house pictures with. It's blowing my mind, right? Okay, so you've probably noticed by now that my lenses are zoom lenses. Well, why is that? It's because each one can take pictures at different focal lengths. There are many lenses packed inside one zoom lens in that sense, aren't there? There are lenses that have a fixed focal length, and they're called prime lenses. As I mentioned earlier, that means that while other lenses can zoom in and out, a prime lens is fixed. For example, let me show you this one. This is a 50 millimeter. Look at this. 50 millimeter, that's all you get. And there's nothing wrong with that. You just have to carry more lenses to get different effects. If you want to shoot wider than this, you have to put on another lens. The advantage of prime lenses is they cost less and you get a big hole in the lens, a big aperture for gathering low light. But again, you'll need to buy more lenses to cover as much ground as a single zoom lens. Let me explain that again. With this 24-70 built into this one lens, there's a 24, a 28, a 35, a 50, and a 60, 65, going all the way up to 70. There are about 4 or 5 lenses in this one lens. Okay. So the other advantage to these prime lenses is they force you to think through things more thoroughly. That forces you to get more creative. You have to physically get off your rear and back up. There's some advantage to that. You know, your feet provide an ultimate zoom. Just walk closer and back up. They're a great zoom. Just do that, move around. Really, whatever. Non-zoom or prime lenses force you to move, and there's nothing wrong with that. Not a thing in the world. In fact, I started out working for National Geographic with all prime lenses, and they do a great job. Your feet, in this regard, can save you a lot of money, right? It's exercise. You walk up, you back away. That's fine. You're thinking about the best view. I'm going to say this a bunch in this course, you guys. It's not about the gear. It's about how you see. There are lenses with longer focal lengths than what we've talked about so far. These big lenses have macro capabilities built into it for specific purposes in photography. Macro lenses are interesting because they let you get super close to a subject. Let's look at one. Look at this, a Pima pineapple cactus, a rare cactus, shot with a macro lens. This macro lens acts as a telephoto, but for close-ups of subjects. The Salt Creek tiger beetle in Lincoln, Nebraska. Look at the detail, and this thing's the size of a sunflower seed. You're zooming in with a macro on one small area of life, and you're blurring that background out completely. You're just blurring it out. Now, most macros have a very limited depth of field. This is a little bit of a tripping point for them. Very shallow depth of field. That cactus picture, lots of depth of field. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but you know what? Most of the time, when you're just shooting handheld with a macro lens, very, very shallow depth of field, similar to a telephoto. Now, we'll discuss depth of field in more depth in a later lecture, but just as with a telephoto, a little camera movement goes a long way towards blurring your images with a macro. A long lens, and I consider a macro a long lens too, can be difficult to use. You should use a tripod. What's a tripod? Well, you know what a tripod is. It's just a stand with 3 legs, holds the camera still. Or a monopod. A monopod is just a single leg, steadies the camera somewhat, but gives you a little bit more flexibility of movement. Not as steady as a tripod, though. When using a macro or telephoto, your whole world vibrates radically with the slightest movement. And so a lot of times you'll want a tripod or a monopod to kind of calm things down a little bit, to steady. Just as exhaling moves the frame around sometime, I like to think of a macro as a telephoto in miniature. That's what it is. The difference being you're zooming in on a little bitty spot instead of zooming out on something larger. But don't worry, we will have a whole lecture on macro photography later in the course. Both macros and telephotos are challenging to use, but if it were easy, wouldn't everybody do it? Yeah, it's not easy. You can really tell when someone's trying to become a better photographer when they step out of their comfort zone and buy a macro. Now, on the other hand, when we have really long lenses, big glass, this is kind of where people go. Once they get into it for a while, they want to get a big piece of glass, and that's photo slang for a 300, a 400, a 500, a 600 millimeter lens. What am I using there? That looks like a 500 millimeter f4 Nikon. This is in this picture. Well, the front elements of these lenses are gigantic because they're designed to gather low light. Light when it's at its lowest, very subtle, beautiful light. They can get it usually. These lenses are also very sharp and they reach out. They really reach out, but they're also very expensive. Thousands of dollars each when purchased new. However, if you photograph a lot of subjects that are hard to get close to, you have to have these tools, don't you? You do. Like for example, if you have to get close to wildlife, like let's say a grizzly fishing for salmon, wouldn't you really want to have the money to use on a long lens? Now, if you've got the money to, let's say, go to Antarctica where you can just walk up to the penguins and they'll sit there and you shoot this with your 24 to 70 zoom lens, that's fine. But most people don't have the money to go to Antarctica, right? They don't. So, what else? I don't know. Most of the animals around here in North America have been shot at. Their ancestors have been shot at, so they're naturally fearful. A lot of times in wildlife work, we have to use a long lens to get close to them in most situations. Same with sporting events. We can't just run out onto the field anytime we want to. Use a long lens to get that action. Every lens will have a minimum focus distance, right? That's the distance, the smallest distance between an object and the lens with the subject still in focus, that minimum focusing distance. Pay attention to this when you're buying a lens or buying a camera with a built-in lens. Why is this important? Well, I'll tell you why it's important. Let's say you want to photograph the head of a praying mantis, but your macro lens won't let you focus close enough to fill the frame with your subject. You'll be in real trouble then, won't you? Similarly, if you're shooting portraits with a zoom, but your subjects have to stand 20 feet away from you in order to be in focus, that's another huge problem. It means that you were probably too cheap to buy a good lens and you've bought junk. Pay attention to your minimum focusing distance before you buy that lens. Again, go to your local camera shop and try out the gear. Think about what you want to photograph and then try it out in person. Take a tape measure with you if you think that it'll help you to figure out what the lens is, what the distance. Remember, with lenses, you get what you pay for. I cannot stress this enough. You can about buy a junk camera, but do not buy junk glass. You get what you pay for. I would not buy a telephoto lens if the best aperture was like f8 or f11. You'd have to shoot in such bright light to get enough light in through that small a hole in your lens. Forget it. You need a big hole in the lens, and that costs more money to make pictures in soft light. That means you need to spend more money. Don't be cheap about this. Think about the money you spend traveling these exotic locations only to bring junk gear with you. I think not. I think not. Remember, the cheaper the lens, the bigger the aperture number, and consequently, the smaller the hole, okay? You need a big hole in that lens, a wide open aperture, an f4, or better yet, f2.8, or even bigger. You don't want to go much higher than f4 if you can help it, okay? When in this lecture, we cover this in detail in a lecture on aperture and depth of field coming up. You might want to watch that one too before you go out and buy your lens. Try to understand this concept of little hole, big hole, and the expense of these lenses before you go buying stuff, okay? To sum up, with the right lens choices, there's a lifetime of shots you can do right in your own town. When people start out, they often think, hey, in my town, it's Lincoln, Nebraska. What in the world am I going to shoot? Well, if you're an old timer, or you listen to an old timer, you know that there are endless stories to tell in your own backyard, right in your own town. Everything from your local marching band to your county fair. If you're truly curious about the world around you, you will never run out of material. You just won't. And subjects to shoot, they are everywhere. We're talking about the dance of life here. Plug into that. You can do an essay on anything in the neighborhood and use the right lenses, and people will love the results, I guarantee you. So, your assignment. The best way to get a sense of how different lenses function in photographs is by trying them all out on the same subject. Your homework for this lecture is to photograph the same person or pet from the same distance using 3 different lenses, wide, normal, and telephoto. For extra credit, try a macro lens, or if you don't have one, figure out what the minimum focus distances are on your other lenses. Compare your pictures once they're done and pay attention to how the choice of lens changes the end result. How are backgrounds affected? What does lens choice do to facial features? In the next 2 lectures, we're going to go into more detail about shutter speed and aperture settings. I've got a lot more pictures to show you and some work out in the field to help you understand how to use it all, how to use all this information and make it come together. Stay tuned.